For sharing those stories, and it's encouraging to hear why this particular place and those events that have occurred in the past and how that's impacted you, and why for you, whether you've thought of that term itself of it being hallowed ground, like whether or not it was literally pointed out, no, it's hallowed ground, you take your shoes off, or whether it was, baptism kind of thing, that there are those events that we've each experienced, individually or collectively, that have made this place what it is with that kind of feeling. And sometimes, as was correctly pointed out by Jenny as well earlier, in the Bible, geographical locations become quite important. They become hallowed turf or hallowed ground. Perhaps that's also more of an accurate or true sense of the word hallowed rather than when we use it in the sporting variety. And you see the geographical location in this passage that we're looking at tonight is important. Events at this location are especially important to Israel and the promises, thank you Warren, and the promises that God made to Abraham, or to Abram as he was. So we are going to do a bit of a reverse. I'm basically not going to get to the passage until later. We're going to look at other passages first, and it's important, I think, for this to actually look at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 to 8, which is why this particular ground, which I'm yet to even name, is important. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all the possessions they had accumulated, and all the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram travelled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah in Shechem, which is there. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." More generally, but he said it at this spot. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord, and he called on the name of the Lord. So in the image on the screen, the valley between the two mountains is the ancient location of Shechem. Now the modern town of Nablus. So that's what you're actually seeing there, is Nablus. And the two mountains on each side are Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. So it's this location where we just read in verse 7 that the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." And Abram then built the altar there. So for the people of Israel, the nation of Israel that they had become in the intervening 400 odd years, this location held particular significance. In fact, simply coming together in this spot showed how God had fulfilled and was fulfilling his promises. Those three promises: the promise of the land that they are literally standing in, the promise of being a great nation, that they're actually standing there together and they're on each of these mountain sides and in that area, in the land as a nation, looking at one another. And thirdly, the promise of being a blessing to all nations. Not a blessing to the nations against God like the Canaanites, but those who turn to him to seek his blessing. Now, we've already seen this in Joshua with Rahab and her family, but foreigners coming into the Israelite community in a legitimate way becomes a recurring feature of their collective history. And last year we saw that with Ruth. So when you get to reading the Joshua 8 passage tonight, which will be read by, I was about to call you Belle, sorry Alice. But the masks are completely throwing me. When it's read by Alice, I want you to remember and see how the idea, the theme of promise fulfillment, of God fulfilling his promises, is at play in this passage. I also want you to hear and see through the prism of obedience. You see, there were specific instructions given during Moses' time that were for this very moment. They called for involvement of the entire nation. No easy thing to organise and pull off. Yet Joshua has already shown his ability to lead the nation of Israel and for the nation of Israel to follow. Is there something going on with the mic? We are going to see Joshua being obedient to the instructions left by Moses, and the nation being obedient to both those old instructions and the directions that Joshua gives. And what our passage in Joshua is at pains to point out is that those instructions are going to be carried out to the last dot of the I and cross of the T. So what was it they were following? For that we need to turn and we're going to read from Deuteronomy 27. And there's, again, just a different image of it, but the mountains and the blessings and the curses as they represented there. So Deuteronomy 27 says this: Moses and the elders of Israel commanded the people, "Keep all these commandments that I give you today. When you have crossed the Jordan into the land the Lord your God is giving you, set up some large stones and coat them with plaster. Write on them all the words of this law when you have crossed over to enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. And when you have crossed the Jordan, set up these stones on Mount Ebal, as I command you today, and coat them with plaster. Build there an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. Do not use any iron tool on them. Build the altar of the Lord your God with field stones, and offer burnt offerings on it to the Lord your God. Sacrifice fellowship offerings there, eating them and rejoicing in the presence of the Lord your God. And you shall write very clearly all the words of this law on these stones you have set up." And he goes into the curses from Mount Ebal. Then Moses and the Levitical priests said to all Israel, "Be silent, Israel, and listen. You have now become the people of the Lord your God. Obey the Lord your God and follow his commands and decrees that I give you today." On the same day, Moses commanded the people, "When you have crossed the Jordan, these tribes shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people: Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And these tribes shall stand on Mount Ebal to pronounce curses: Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. The Levites shall recite to all the people of Israel in a loud voice: Cursed is anyone who makes an idol, a thing detestable to the Lord, the work of skilled hands, and sets it up in secret. Then all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed is anyone who dishonors their father or mother. Then all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed is anyone who moves their neighbour's boundary stone. Then all the people shall say, you guessed it. Cursed is anyone who leads the blind astray on the road. Then all the people shall say, Amen. Last one I'll do. Cursed is anyone who withholds justice from the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow. Then all the people shall say, Amen. Amen or Amen, however you choose to follow that one. It goes on, but we'll stop there as I think you get the picture. So pay attention when we get to the Joshua reading to both the elements of promise fulfillment and obedience. But there's also one last idea or theme or element that I want you to be considering when engaging with the reading. Restoration. Now we had to skip past chapters 7 and the majority of 8, first 29 verses of it. So I'll give you the summary version to catch you up. The Israelites get convincingly defeated at Ai, go into mass despair about it. God shows them why they were defeated, which was because of Achan taking devoted items when they defeated Jericho. Achan and his whole household are expunged from Israel, and then Israel experienced a resounding victory over Ai. Well, the narrator, author, compiler of Joshua places this account of Israel coming together as a nation just after the victory at Ai, which when casually reading the book, as you might do today, reading through 2021 eyes, you would think that this geographical location of Shechem and the mountains of Baal and Gerizim are very close to Ai, but they're not. And there's a map of it. The image quality is not that wonderful, but you can see from that. So Jericho is down around this area. Ai is not that far, but it's up into the mountains. There's Jerusalem further down. But we have Shechem all the way up there with Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. It's a fair way away. There's quite a few towns and other inhabitants that would have lived in between, so that is not some short trip. And to put it into our context, if Jericho was Raymond Terrace, here we go, people are going to be offended now. If Jericho was Raymond Terrace and Cardiff Heights was Newcastle CBD was Jerusalem, then Shechem is out at Cessnock. That's kind of the geographical distance. So clearly it's not right next to, we are not right next to Cessnock, right? There is a significant gap there. There would have needed to be other significant victories since Ai to facilitate the Israelites being there. So it's more than likely, as was mentioned by Tim Mackey in the Joshua video from a few weeks ago, that what we're getting here in these chapters is or does have an element of the highlights package of sorts. Which then begs the question, why does this event make the highlights real? In part, I think there is a further link to Abraham, as back in verse 8 of chapter 12 of Genesis, which we read out earlier, it mentions, from there he went on towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Now this is literally the next verse after he has been speaking to the Lord at Shechem. So we have the reversal of the movement that we see from Abraham in Genesis occurring here, and one that the Jewish readers of Joshua would have immediately picked up on. So like I said, a further link to Abraham. But I also think that it's placed here because of the importance of the act as part of a restoration of the nation. There is healing occurring here. And there is modelling occurring here too. When God has brought about forgiveness for his people and victory in what he's called them to do, despite their own previous failings, it's right to take the time to honour God and give thanks for that restoration. So, as Joshua 8, verses 30 to 35 is now finally read for us, keep in mind what you've heard from Genesis and Deuteronomy, and in particular those three themes of promise fulfillment, obedience, and restoration.
Joshua 8, verses 30 to 35. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stone, on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses. All the Israelites, with their elders, officials, judges, were standing on both sides of the ark of the covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native-born were there. Half of the people stood in front of the Mount Gerizim, and half of them stood in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterwards, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read out to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them.
Thank you, Alice. Did you hear the elements of promise fulfillment, obedience, and restoration? If not, I encourage you to spend more time in this passage, and in fact, that's what Tom is going to make us do. Once we're done, we will actually spend more time working through the passage. But as I bring the message component of our service to a close, I want to highlight that we see these three elements at play in Jesus, in his life and his death and his resurrection. I'll just let you think that through. Promise fulfillment, obedience, and restoration in Jesus. And we find that these are present in the lives we live as disciples of Christ. Now, I have three small passages. One, I couldn't call it verses because the first one's actually 3 verses. So there's 5 verses in total that highlight each of these themes, and I'm going to finish by putting them up on the screen for you to spend time reflecting, meditating on, and owning. Now, of course, these are not the only 3 verses that relate to these themes. If you Google that, these ideas and this in the Bible, there is a plethora of verses. I've just chosen 3 for us to actually focus on tonight. So we're going to have a time of thinking through and praying about these. That's in your own personal reflection. And at the end of that, Tom will bring us back to continue leading us through the rest of the service. Thanks.